We've seen the prophecy. It is stated in scripture. When I gather the children of Israel a second time. If is Yahuwah's doing in Israel right now, that was established in 1948, and that was gathered, that would have been a second time, and the scripture now is referring to actually a third time. But since you and I know that his word is true, and his word does not return to him void, and we know that perhaps something else is at play before our eyes, then it's time for us now to believe what scripture says and try to determine by his Ruach HaKodesh what's at play before our eyes. Because according to scripture, when he gathers the children of Yasharel from all the corners of the earth and the isles are far off, there will be peace in the land, right? There will be rejoicing and no more mourning. There will be, they will be saying, holiness, Yahuwah is holy. Holiness is Yahuwah. And everybody will come to his temple from Shabbat to Shabbat, new moon to new moon. So, what's really happening there, saints? We're winding down. Who is actually in the land of Israel? So, yes, the nation of Israel has been established. But it has been established, as you saw, that I read from you, facts by the Rothschilds. The United Nations divided the land, and America, Harry Truman, was paid off by the Rothschild to declare Israel a nation officially. So who actually is in the land? And there's a reason I want to read this in the KJV. And we're going to look, what we're going to discover now is that Yahusha spoke a prophecy. But the prophecy that Yahusha spoke, we're going to discover was also in the Torah, what they call the Old Testament, saints, right? It was also in the Old Testament. We're going to look at Luke chapter 7, Luke chapter 22, one of the favorite scriptures that we hear a lot of people quote. Luke chapter, what did I say? 21? Luke 21. So let me get that up. It's really important to understand this, because when you believe deception, when you believe a deception without knowing it's deception, you believe many other, it trickles. It's like a snowball effect. Because of that one deception, because I believed this many years ago, then I believed in rapture, right? I've got to share my screen now. I believed in rapture many, many, many years ago, because you've been told that prophecy has actually been fulfilled according to scripture, but something else is actually happening, but still according to scripture. So saints, let's look at this. Still, something else is happening, but it's happening still according to scripture. We're going to read from 7. And they asked him, saying, so we know the disciples asked him, what shall be the signs of the end? Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign shall there be when these things shall come to pass? And he said, take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Mashiach, and the time draweth near. Go ye not therefore after them. But when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then said he unto him, nation shall arise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. These are the signs of the end. And we're seeing this right now. We know that we are in the end times, because it's like never before. There are over 100 and something wars taking place in the world right now. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be in the heaven. We've seen the signs, we're seeing all of this. But before all these, so this is something he paused here. He's saying to them what shall happen in the end, but he's pausing and let them know, well, before these things that is going to happen in the end, this is what's going to happen to you, the disciples. So this part is in reference to the disciples whom he's speaking to. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, and they shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts not to meditate before what ye shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed, both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends. And some of you shall they cause to be put to death, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not an hair of your head perish. In your patience possess ye your souls. So he's saying this to these disciples. He said what is going to happen in the end. He paused, right? And he's telling them, but before these things that I just listed here, the nation against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, the earthquakes in diverse places, the signs in the heaven, before all that happens, he's letting the disciples know, well, hey, this is what's going to happen to you, right? What is going to happen to you is that you are now, they're going to lay hands on you and persecute you and deliver you up to the synagogues. This is what's going to happen to you. Then now he comes back now. And when he shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. And we know that this is 70 AD. This aspect was fulfilled in 70 AD, right? Let them which are in Judah flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck. So all things as it pertains to the destruction of Jerusalem. Because remember, we just read all the scriptures when at the beginning, when we read of the fall of the kingdom of the northern tribe of Israel and the fall of the kingdom of Judah. And that Yahushua, he rent himself, rent himself from them. So this prophecy, that's it, all that has been written about that is fulfilled, right? Understand it in context. And remember, Yahushua is the word of Elohim, right? He's speaking, he knows what he's saying. But woe unto them, so we read that already, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. So now we've seen again the scattering. If you remember, when the children of Israel came out of Babylonian captivity, which we went through earlier on at the start of this presentation, when the children of Judah, went into Babylonian captivity, and then when they were actually freed, and they were actually allowed to return and rebuild the second temple. And we have the two candlesticks, the prophecy of the two candlesticks and the two olive trees before Yahuwah. And these were the two that would rebuild the second temple, that was in charge of rebuilding the second temple. Now, so what we're seeing here is that they rebuilt the temple and they went back into Jerusalem. But now Jerusalem finally, as was declared in prophecy, the final fall of Jerusalem happened. Jerusalem was trodden down by the Gentiles. And it says here, and shall be led away captive into all nations. Remember, it was not the northern tribe that was in the land at the time. It was those from the kingdom of Judah who came out of Babylonian captivity, right? The northern tribes were already scattered. Some remain in Assyria and some elsewhere, as we see in scripture when we read in Isaiah and a couple other scriptures, that when Yahushua returns, it says, I will pluck them out from Assyria. Some are still there. So we know that some are still there, and it mentioned other countries. So what we see in here is that, and they shall be led away captive into all nations. When that final fall in 70 AD and Rome came in and they were scattered, some of them found refuge. When you read the textbooks, now I have some of the history books here. They found refuge in Europe. They found refuge all over the world, right? So but most of them went to Europe, they went to Rome, they went to Italy, they went to different places, and they allowed them to come in. And that's another story. I won't go into that now. But here, what's the important thing to understand here in scripture is that it said it shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It tells us here, this Yahushua is saying this, that Jerusalem will be trodden down unto the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, based on what Yahushua is saying here, he's telling us that those who were in the land, which we know are Yehuda, scattered, will be scattered because they will fall by the edge of the sword. Those who died, those who take captive, but they out of the land. And the land now, Rome is the Gentile nation, and we're going to get to that. But it's going to be trodden down until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Men's heart failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So based on this scripture, Jerusalem is going to be trodden down by the Gentiles until Yahushua comes. Until he comes. This is what Yahushua himself is saying, which confirms what we just read in the Old Testament, all the scripture we read. It confirms it. They will be trodden down by the Gentiles until Yahushua returns. Until he returns, when they see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the heavens. And when these things begin to come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Now we'll stop here. We stop here, right? And we're going to look at Revelations, because we know we're talking about what's actually happening in the nation of Israel right now. There's something else that is actually happening in the nation of Israel. And Yahushua has given us an idea. He has said to us that Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now let us look at Revelations, one verse only in Revelation chapter 11. Only one verse. And that verse says, we know this chapter is about the two witnesses. So the two witnesses, there will be a time when the two witnesses, whether people believe it or not, the scripture says it, the two witnesses will be here. And no, it's not heaven and earth, as some people have commented on my channel, and no, it's not the Mormon church. No, it's two witnesses. It's two people. I have a video on who those two people are. I will encourage you to go watch that video, because I went through it with the scriptures and justification. And I believe very strongly by the grace of Yahuwah that I am correct on that one. Maybe might be wrong on something else, but I'm correct on that one. So let's see here. So the two witnesses will be coming. But let's see in here in verse 12. Right? I think I have the wrong verse. I'm supposed to put 2, I think. So we'll read it in the KJV. The reason I say that, because the Hebrew word goyim, the Sefer translates the goyim, but there's a reason I'm sharing it in the KJV, because goyim has different meanings depending on what's the different words before it. So it just has all nations for everything, and doesn't have the specific places where it says nations and where it says Gentiles. So I do Bible study with all different Bibles. I use the KJV at times. I use the AMPC, which we know the Amplified is based on, expounding it, what the translators use in writing the scriptures, right? And I use the BYNV, which is directly from Hebrew to English, and I use the Sefer. So let's read at 11 here. And we're only going to read one verse in Revelations 11. Only one verse. So let's go here. Oh, this is eye-opening. Oh, it's not giving me the tab. So Revelations 11, only verse 2. Remember we read what Yahushua said. Who said it? Yahushua said Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles. The disciples are asking him about the signs of the end of the time, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And then he said, and then they shall see the sign of the Son of Man coming. So Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until Yahushua returns. Forget Hebrew Israelites. Forget this group out there teaching that. You remember what I said some weeks ago on another live? The different religions, this one has a little truth, this one has a little truth, this one has a little truth. But we need to forget denomination, and we need to just see scripture. I am not ascribing to any label. We need to see scripture here. So Yahushua says this, and Revelations, he comes back. Remember the revelation of Yahushua HaMashiach given to him by Elohim, signified by his angel. So he says here in Revelations 11:2, but the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. So this is telling us about a particular time of the Gentiles now. Oops. This is telling us about a particular time of the Gentiles, where when the two witnesses are there and they have rebuilt the temple, right? And they have rebuilt that temple, they will be trodden down. In other words, the temple will be controlled by the Gentiles, right? The holy city will be tread underfoot for 42 months. In the first 3.5 years, the two witnesses will be prophesying. And that will be a very important time for us who understand what's happening. But also the Antichrist will be there as well in Jerusalem. And we know what he does. And the Gentiles that are there will be treading the holy city underfoot. What I'm going to read now is, who are the Gentiles? Right? So we're coming to the close as to what's really happening. So who are the Gentiles? And I have a book here, like I shared at the beginning. And this book here, Unmasking the Gentiles, right? We're going to read just excerpts only. And it's important to understand right? Page 3. What's really happening? This is the part. Yahusha said, Yerushalayim will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Yahusha was not saying something that was new. It was actually prophesied, okay, in the Old Testament. And that's what we're going to come to now. So, before we get to the genealogy in Genesis 10, let's take a look at the prophecy concerning Japheth, which is given in Genesis 9. Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. You can write that down, Genesis 9:27. At face value, this seems very straightforward. But when we do some digging into the Hebrew, it seems to indicate something different in context. We have to understand context. Patha. So write down Strong's Concordance 6601. I double checked all these things as well. A primitive root to open, meaning to open, that is be causatively, make roomy, usually figuratively in a mental or moral sense. To be causatively, make simple or in a sinister way, delude, allure, deceive, enlarge, entice, flatter, persuade. So I took a snapshot of the patha. Let me see if I can get that up really quick. Oh, I don't know, I just can't find it. But I took a snapshot of the patha. If you go into it, it will tell you how many times that it was when that word is used, it actually means deceive, enlarge, entice, most of the times, right? That particular word. So Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, right? And he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Perhaps the most interesting part of this is that the word pata has a double meaning, both of which will be fulfilling the descendants of Japheth. Understanding Genesis 9:27 in context is important because without it, we do not see the connection between what's really being set up for us in Genesis and many of the prophecies concerning the Gentiles later on in Scripture. Because we've been taught by mainstream Christianity that anybody who's not a Hebrew is a Gentile, just broad like that. But there's a double meaning to the word Gentile, the meaning of the word Gentile. Just like when it says in Scripture, where Sodom and Gomorrah, where our Yah was crucified, there is a double meaning because Sodom and Egypt, the Sodom didn't exist at that time, right? But we're going to get to that so you could understand it. Bear with me. So the deception of Japheth. So in other words, Elohim shall enlarge Japheth. The word patha, allure, deceive, enlarge, entice, flatter, persuade. Okay? The deception of Japheth and them living in the tents of Shem are tied together like cause and effect. If Japheth is going to live in the tents of Shem, they would also have to be living where? In the land of Israel. Having to be living, right? They'll also have to be living in the land of Israel, which is the land of Shem. Because remember, Noah divided the land and Shem actually got that part of the land. Noah prophesied that Japheth would dwell in the tents of Shem, and Mashiach prophesied that the Gentiles will occupy Jerusalem until their time was fulfilled. Do you see the correlation, saints? So Yahusha actually spoke something that was prophesied in Genesis. That's what's happening here. It's a fulfillment of Genesis. It's not what we've been taught. If the United Nations, all the leaders of the world, and the mainstream media all agree that, oh, this is prophecy fulfilled, the children of Israel return to their land, saints, go research. Because I'm not saying that they always lie, but we know they lie most of the time, right? If they agree on something, something's up, right? Because we saw the scripture when Yahusha says he gathered them that have been scattered and he plucked them out of where they scattered and returned them to the land, that they would have peace, that they would say Yahuwah is holy, that all the nations will come up and worship him, that there would be even judgment on the other nations and the heathen. So Yahusha said that Gentiles will be living in the land until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. We come back and see in Revelations when the temple is built that the temple, the outer court will be trodden down by the Gentiles. Do you see coming together? The prophecy in Genesis says, Japheth shall enlarge, Yahuwah shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. When you go into the book of Jubilees, even in Genesis, it tells you about the dividing of the land and where they got. The tents of Shem, the land of Shem is Israel. And Japheth is dwelling in the tents of Shem. And we saw patha is the Hebrew word, which means deceive, enlarge, entice, flatter, persuade. So something deeper is happening here. Let's read another excerpt really quickly, page 55. Really small excerpt. And we're going to see here. So, what is the identity? Because we've always thought everyone is a Gentile who is not of the children of Israel, is a Gentile. So, as we get deeper into the study of the Gentiles, it wouldn't be complete without a word study on the word Gentiles and heathen. Much of what we believe concerning the Gentiles is a result of Europeanized teachings that have been passed down for generations. Remember, and I'm saying this without going into race, and I just say this, I just speak openly. When Yahusha came and the disciples began to compile the letters, right? And Paul, remember, Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. And the disciples were told not to go and minister to the Gentiles. It's because they knew where the Gentiles were located. Are you seeing this? Are you beginning to see this? Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. Paul went to a particular part of the world, right? But we're going to get there. And I'm saying this to say is because we have received a Europeanized scripture. We have received the name Jesus, which is not his name. Some people still call it. They still really want to call it. That's up to them. It's between them and Yah. But if you love the truth, you do the research and see it's a made-up name. It's not even the meaning of his name. It's not even the translation of his name. It's not even the transliteration of his name. They insert it. So I'm saying this to say where much of what we believe concerning the Gentiles is a result of Europeanized teaching. It's saying in this book, much of what we've been given, the pagan titles in our mouth, is Europeanized. Even the white Jesus, painting him white, is because they had to present him to the European community. You do your research, you can see more about that. But what we're going to discover here is Gentile often capitalized. What you would see here, the commonly accepted definition, and I double-checked it even on Wikipedia. This is what's on Wikipedia as well. A person of non-Jewish nation or non-Jewish faith, right, is a Gentile. But when you begin to study the word correctly, right, you would discover, hey, many people correctly point out that the words translated as nations and Gentiles is goy and goyim. The problem with this line of thinking is that while it's technically correct, it is only part of the story. The word goy and goyim often have different prefixes and suffixes attached to them, which is why they are translated differently in various places in scripture. So you have hogoy, bigoyim, goyakim, goyaka, kegoy, and we have a whole number of occurrences. But the Bible acts as its own dictionary. Outside of that, we can look at both history and culture. It is in the Old Testament that we first encounter Hagoyim, the Gentiles. In almost all cases, it is translated as a proper noun, unlike its counterpart Goyahim, which is always translated as an improper noun, the nations. So there are times where Gentile is used as a proper noun, and it refers to the sons of Japheth. And there are times when the Gentile is used as an improper noun, and it refers to nations. That's just the Hebrew language, right? Now, the reason why I'm saying this is to say this. Japheth. Let's look at that. Genesis 10:5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, and their families in their nations. When you read after they divided the land, when Noah divided the land, right? And they gave them their portions. There's a summary after each one. So go look at those summary verses. Genesis 10:5, Genesis 10:20, Genesis 10:31. And the summary for Japheth says, by these were the isles of the Gentiles. Capital G as a proper noun. It refers to Japheth. So the isles, the people from that area where Japheth went, was given, which we know is the European side, right? These are the Gentiles. They received their lands by their families and by their tongues. When you read Ham, these are the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. Now, the word nations there, when you read that in Hebrew, it's begoyim. It's not the same Gentiles that's used. So if everybody who's a Gentile Everybody who's not a Jew is a Gentile. There's context. That's what I want to say in essence, is that there's context. So Begoyim, the same Goyim, but Begoyim, the prefix that's before it and the suffix after. It here you see it is being used as just the word nations. So the sons of Ham, why weren't they called Gentiles? They were called the sons of Ham. And the sons of Shem, why weren't they called Gentiles? These are the sons of Shem after their families and their tongues in their lands, after their nations. Why won't they call Gentiles? It's because, saints, we've been taught something, but we're breaking down a false teaching we've always received from mainstream Christianity, right? Where we understanding the context. There is a people who are classified as Gentiles according to scripture. And those people, according to scripture in Genesis 10, are the descendants of Japheth, according to scripture. Now, let me just read this really quickly, this last part from this book. Right? So, if the claim that Gentiles were all non-Hebrew people, there would be a conflict in this story. Who was Tidal? Tidal, he was the king of the Goyim. He was king of the Gentiles. It's because Tidal, king of the Gentiles, was situated in that same territory where the descendants of Japheth were given land, right? Neither of these kings, so Amraphel, he was not Hebrew. The other king that went up with Tidal, remember that in Genesis, I think that story is told with the kings, right? So Tidal was specifically stated that he's a king of the Gentiles. So interestingly, the Gentiles are not mentioned again in scripture from Genesis 9 or 10 where I read until Judges 4. They are not mentioned during any of the conquests of Canaan, but by the time we reach in the book of Judges, we see a Gentile settlement in Canaan. After the death of Ehud, a judge of Israel, Israel rebelled against Elohim and they were sold to Yabin, the king of Canaan, as slaves, Judges 4:2. The captain of Yabin's army was Sisera, and he lived among the Gentiles. So this is the quote, Judges 4:2. And Elohim sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. It's a particular place where particular people lived. Last thing we're going to read here is in the New Testament. Remember the Hebrews in the New Testament, right? The disciples were Hebrews. They understood this. We have been brainwashed and taught certain things, and now we're undoing a lot of things. So listen to this. The New Testament gives us the most concrete evidence that the Gentiles were a specific group of people and not an all-encompassing term for non-Jews. So let's look at Matthew 4:15. The land of Zabulon and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. Galilee was originally Hebrew land, and Hebrews are not Gentiles, right? So Galilee was originally Hebrew. However, when the Romans took over, they seized Galilee and divided it into several small cities and made it a minor base of operations: Judah, Samaria, Paralia, and Galilee. And under Roman occupation, it became known as the Galilee of the Gentiles, right? So we also have here as well, where Paul, he was particularly told that he was supposed to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. So these 12, Yahusha set forth in Matthew 10:5 and commanded them, saying, Go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. He's actually telling them not to go to the way of the Gentiles, because remember, the sons of Japheth were given land in a particular territory in Europe, in Asia. That is why. So the 12 disciples knew exactly who the Gentiles were and where they were. So the 12 were told not to go into the way or the direction of the Gentiles. Understand the context. And lastly, so why is it that Paul's missionary journeys are highlighted by most teachers, but not those of the original 12 apostles? It's because the original 12 disciples only preached in Africa and Arabia. However, as we read, Yahushua told his original 12 disciples not to preach to the Gentiles, and they didn't enter Europe or Asia. However, when Paul is called to be the apostle of the Gentiles, he exclusively travels to Europe and Asia. So we see here that the Gentiles are a particular group of people. And this now makes sense when we understand the prophecy that Yahushua spoke was actually the fulfillment of prophecy in Genesis. When it says Japheth, Elohim shall enlarge in Japheth. When you look for the word putter, it means deceive, it means persuade, it means entice, and Japheth shall dwell in the land of Shem. Since this is what's happening. What's happening right now, the establishment of Israel in 1948, is Japheth dwelling in the land of Shem. That's what's happening. What Yahushua said that Jerusalem treaded on by the Gentiles, he was actually speaking what was prophesied in Genesis. The Gentiles are specific people, descendants of Japheth. However, it's important to note context. There are times when it's used as a proper noun, and there's at times when it's used as an improper noun that means nations, the heathen nations. So it's important to understand the context, right? So Tidal, king of the Gentiles, he was king of the particular people located in a particular place. So the Gentiles, based on scripture, was specifically associated with Europe and Asia, which is where the descendants of Japheth settled. And like I mentioned, it can also refer to heathen to represent the characteristic. So just as it was said in Sodom and Egypt, where Yah was crucified, Yahushua wasn't crucified in Sodom and Egypt. We understand it's Jerusalem, but that was used to show the characteristic, right, of the place of what was going on, right? So it's the same thing here with Gentiles. It is used as a proper noun, which means the sons of Japheth, the descendants of Japheth, but as an improper noun, depending on the context, it can refer to heathen. So the prophecy of old was what? Japheth will enlarge in the tents of Shem, which we just read. Japheth, the sons of Japheth, will dwell in the tents of Shem. Shem was given the land that Japheth is now residing in. So who are the people actually there? It is the Khazars. And when you read about the Khazars, so the kingdom of the Khazars was a kingdom that was established at a particular time. And that kingdom, it fell after a while and it got scattered. But what is important to know about that kingdom is, how did they become Jews? How did they adopt the Jewish culture? Is it because they were born Jews? Is it because they were Hebrews? I'm reading from this book of 1966, right? A History of the Jews, page 280. Around the year 600, a belligerent tribe of half Mongolian people similar to the modern Turks had conquered the territory of what is now southern Russia. Okay? Before long, the kingdom of the Khazars, as this tribe was known, stretched from the Caspian to the Black Sea. Its capital city, Itil, was at the mouth of the Volga River. The Khazars mingled with the native Slavic population. So there was Jewish, Christian, and Mohammedan, that was the Muslims. Merchants visited them, and these contacts had a cultural result. Sometime during the 8th century, the Khazar king and nobility became civilized enough to want to abandon their pagan worship and adopt a monotheistic religion, about which the visitors from neighboring lands to the south used to tell them. But which monotheistic religion was it to be? The merchantines from the Byzantine Empire, that's Eastern Rome, urged Christianity upon them, right? Because remember, Christianity came from Rome. We're not talking about the way of Yahuwah, talking about Constantine's Christianity. The merchants from Persia urged them to adopt Mohammedanism, right? Muslims. Both of these were the religions of mighty conquering kingdoms. Each argued that their Elohim was on their side. Apparently, each of these religions won a large number of adherents among the Khazars. But the royal family and the largest number of the nobility were impressed with Judaism. That was the religion they adopted, and although they did not force it upon others, but they adopted it strategically. For several centuries, the Jewish kingdom of the Khazars continued to rule over southern Russia, and even the Prince of Kiev, which is Ukraine today, paid them tribute, because remember, Ukraine was once part of Russia. So we see here, by the end of the 10th century, the strength of the Russians increased, especially after the king accepted the Greek Catholic faith. So I'm going to skip that and read this last part. The state then came to an end, though a good many of them remained Jews. Some mingled with the Jews of the Byzantine Empire, which is Eastern Europe, right? Others remained Jews within the Muscovite Principality, but even those who adopted Christianity retained many Jewish observances. When you go through the rest of it, which I won't read, but when you go through this, the rest of that chapter, A History of the Jews, 1966, it tells you how they went about to convert the people, where to teach it in the schools and to appoint priests, and the priests all had to learn the language, and they had to study the Talmud, and it tells you how they did all of this. So there are Khazars who are from Europe dwelling in the land today, and they are Ashkenazi. Now, Ashkenazi, as anyone who has read scripture, which I won't go into now, Google it, you could find it. Ashkenazi is a descendant of Japheth. He's a descendant of Japheth. And the Ashkenazi are Eastern European converts that are linked directly to Ashkenaz, a descendant of Japheth found in Genesis 10:3. So I have some sources here. You can take a note of these sources and check it out when you have the time. It's science.org. And what these sources show you is that there's DNA to prove that the Ashkenazis originate in Europe. That is where they actually originate. And we know that the sons of Japheth actually went to Europe. They were given the part of the land over there. So I won't read everything here, but we see here the analysis revealed. This is from Harvard Medical School. So this is reputable. Two distinct subgroups with the remains, one with Greater Middle Eastern ancestry, which may represent Jews with origins in Western Germany, and another with Greater Eastern and Central Europe ancestry. The modern Ashkenazi population formed a mix of these groups and absorbed little to no outside genetic influences over the 600 years that followed, the author says. And some disease-causing mutations that are widespread in modern Ashkenazi Jews are suspected to have been introduced by members of the founding group long ago. So we know that, for instance, I won't go into that now, but those dwelling in the land have one of the highest cases of skin cancer and that sort of thing, because of course, the weather over there is not the skin is not susceptible to it. But nonetheless, this here shows that there is analysis. They conducted an analysis from their DNA, from their teeth, and they were able to prove that they originate in Germany, they originate in Central Europe. So you can check out Harvard Medical School. And the last thing you can check out is science.org. Science.org also tells you by comparing the earthwood genomes with modern and ancient DNA data from many different populations, the researchers were able to pair even further back to the origin of those scattered European communities. The comparison suggested the Ashkenazi circa 1350 had a mix of ancestry resembling populations from southern Italy or Sicily today, with components found in modern Eastern Europe and the Middle East mixed in. So we see here, Ashkenazis are descendant of Japheth, right? Who dwelt in Europe. And Ashkenaz, a descendant of Japheth, is now dwelling in the tents of Shem. This is the prophecy that is actually being fulfilled. So, as we conclude, has prophecy really been fulfilled? Yes, but not the prophecy that we've been taught by mainstream Christianity, the United Nations, the USA, and the rest of the elite, that Israel has become a nation in one day in 1948, and now you have to look for rapture. Prophecy has been fulfilled, but not that prophecy. That is a deception. And I hope that all the labor in Yahuwah tonight through the scriptures has proven this to you. Prophecy has been fulfilled according to the scripture. Jerusalem is being trodden down by the Gentiles. And as Yahusha has said, referring to Genesis when it is prophesied that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. So I want to conclude on this misconception